So now I'm going to go over to my A110, because right now my A110 is in one of these lower octaves, and I'm just going to move it up one octave. Let's keep an eye on our oscilloscope. We should be able to tell what's happening here. There you go. I'm going to go again. And one more time. And we're just going to go all the way up. And if we look at the A110, you can kind of get a rough idea of where I'm at right now by looking at the dial over here. I'm going to go up one more. Let's look at our oscilloscope over there. Okay, so I'm going to bring this back down to one of the lower octaves. So right there you can see the frequency of one is affecting the other. And also if you look at the phase lock loop module here, you can see that this light, hopefully you can see that this light is flashing relatively quickly. It might be a little hard to see because my camera is not actually reflecting that. Let me adjust a little bit of the offset to see if I can get a little better behavior from the light so you can actually see that in the camera. Still looks about the same. Let me adjust the frequency down here. Just want it to sort of flash a little more intermittently so it's actually visible on camera. I'll move over to comparator number 2. There we go. That's a little more intermittent so you can kind of see it flickering. But you can also hear the effect that it's having. Let's pop over to our oscilloscope. Let's take a look at what's happening. This is comparator number 2 of the middle section. So quite different looking than what we had before. On number 3, I'm just going to pop back here. That is number 3 right there in our oscilloscope, and this is number 2 comparator. So sonically, the waveform is very different as well than what you're listening to out of the phase comparator 2. Now I do have a little bit of offset going on in my A196. I'm going to go ahead and take that away. And if we look at our oscilloscope, we can see there's some very erratic behavior going on with the phase lock loop module. Now at this point I can start to sort of adjust the offset, or I can change my comparator type, or I can start, changing the octaves of my oscillator to see what kind of interesting type of effects I get. And there it seems as though it's not quite as able to lock onto our audio sine wave anymore. But what happens if we go back to 3? And we get a little bit more accurate of a lock, and we can actually see it there. So depending on your source material, this goes kind of back to a little bit about what we talked about in the basics. Depending on your source material, you may need to adjust the comparator type that you're using when integrating an external sound source. So this happens to be, of course, the sine wave that we're using right now, but these settings may be entirely different for something like a triangle wave, or a pulse wave, or a saw wave. Any of those, you may have to sort of adjust your settings as you go along. We haven't heard phase comparator 1, so let's flip over to that. And let's actually take a look at it on the oscilloscope as well. So there we have that. I'm going to bring my VCO, my A110 over here, down one octave so we can see that a little clearer. And just so we can kind of get that idea of the locking in nature, because you should be able to see the flickering light here at the phase lock loop. I'm going to pull that out. There we go. So now all we have is our sine wave right there. You'll also notice that we can't really hear our rectangle wave anymore. But if I flip over to 3, I think, yeah, I can actually hear it a little bit better. So I mean, different settings for different timbral advantages, and also just if you like it. Okay, let's take a look at our oscilloscope again as we play around a little more with Phase Comparator 1. I'm going to adjust the offset ever so slightly here. Let's keep an eye on our oscilloscope. Getting a fair amount of locking here. Fairly synchronous there. I'm going to flip over into the mid-range of our VCO on our A196. There we go. And we can see the flickering is kind of modified a little bit. And adjust the offset back. Very erratic there. If we take a look over at our oscilloscope, for the most part, it's fairly steady. And you can see that this isn't really changing the timbre of it that much. But as soon as I turn this, we do get a change in timbre. And bring it back down to the low setting. Let's go back into Phase Comparator number 2. There we are. Now let's take a look at our oscilloscope there, because we're getting some pretty interesting results over there. And I'm going to do a little offset there. So at this point you can kind of adjust the balance of the two waveforms to get something that you sonically like. Or I can, adjust the offset a little less, a little more. So if I want a little more crunchy, I can. Something like that. Bring it back into the low setting. We take a look at our oscilloscope again. We're getting some very interesting results from the oscilloscope. So that's right there, and if we look at the A196, that's Phase Comparator number 2 with an audio rate sine wave. And then over at our oscilloscope we can see that the waveform has changed very distinctly now. Okay. So that's kind of the basic idea of what's actually happening in this module. Now we did get kind of a brief kind of overview of what this kind of sonically, just in general, changes. You can get some very erratic results, or you can get some more kind of consistent results depending on which comparator you choose. So something like that, or if you kind of like this sort of more erratic type of sound over at our oscilloscope, let's take a look at that. You can do that. And one of the best descriptions, I guess, I read about the phase lock loop was on the Mamonu Labs, I think that's how you say it, on a website that had a PLL, or phase lock loop lecture, on it, that was saying that basic explanation of what this module does. It allows you to add unpredictability into your patch in a very controlled way. So great explanation. I thought that sort of made all the sense in the world when trying to understand a module like this. So I hope that you found this useful, at least getting the basic visualizations of the VCO as well as the phase comparator section of our phase lock loop. In the next segment, we're going to kind of do a little bit of a review and then just kind of maybe trigger a few random notes into the phase lock loop before we go into the low pass filter section, then also triggering some CVs here, and doing a few more intricate experiments with the phase lock loop. So again, I hope that you found this useful. Please keep on patching out there, and thank you so much for watching.